Brianna. And now Ames and I are gonna have a little conversation. And I wanted to start with thanking you, Ames, for being part of this or hosting this event today. And can you describe your operation, where it's situated in the world, and what kinds of landscapes and habitats surround it?
Yeah, well, I'm really honored to be included in this really exciting discussion, and I'm looking forward to learning from the presenters too. Our vineyard and winery is in the Alexander Valley of Sonoma County. It is the whole property is about 340 acres. We grow 55 acres of wine grapes, but that's so the vineyard portion of it's only about 15% of the total land that we manage. We have several different habitats throughout the ranch. A few years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, we worked with Pepperwood Preserve, which is our next door neighbor, and we were really lucky to just be able to have a ranch right next to them. They have a 3,000 acre forever wild preserve. And so we benefit both from their proximity, but also from their expertise. And they helped us identify several different habitats. There's oak woodland, mixed conifer forest, riparian woodland, and chaparral and grassland, and of course the vineyard land as well. And all of those, including the vineyard, can support a diverse species, diverse mix of songbirds.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into growing grapes and making wine?
Yeah, I grew up on a vineyard in Virginia. I'm sorry, not on a vineyard. I grew up on a farm in Virginia. So I've always sort of been really interested in farming, agriculture. And when I first started learning about wine, I was really excited about the connection between land and wine quality and just different types of wine. And so I'm always really curious about how we can farm in a way that influences the way the wine tastes in the glass. That's like fascinating to me. So that's part of my initial motivation. And then I also had an opportunity right after college to join the Peace Corps, and I worked with farmers in the Guatemalan highlands. And I learned a lot about sustainability there, and that's the definition of sustainability. The farmers have been working that land for 10,000 years, farming. So it's had to support communities for all that time. But I've also kind of seen in recent decades, there's been an introduction of more kind of modern American farming methods that rely a lot on chemicals. And so that was really a wake-up call to me. And so I knew that when I started farming, I wanted to do it in a way that was chemical-free. So that's why we farm organically.
Yeah, so you farm organically and you conserve wild spaces. And, we've seen over and over how lots of people, when they look at wild spaces, they think they're wasted spaces. But can you explain how your organic production goes hand in hand with the conservation of wild areas?
Yeah, that's super important for us. Most of our land is not cultivated at all. And it might seem like a lot of extra unnecessary land that we had to buy. But the one thing that it does, it's kind of obvious, is it provides a buffer between our vineyards, which are organic, and neighboring ones, which are conventional. So it kind of prevents any spray drift from coming onto our ranch. But that's more, I don't think that's the most important thing. Is just the very rich and diverse array of species that it supports. There are, not only do we have vineyard forests or woods all around us, just inner space between the vineyard blocks, we have a lot of woods too. And there are, they host overwintering populations of insects that are beneficial to us, that help prey on some of the insect pests that we don't want. And it's also just creates this very resilient system. We have so many different species that no one can ever get out of control and damage the crop. And then also, part of that woodland, we have just these 300 acres of our land that are basically wild, but we're right next to the Pepperwood Preserve, which is over 3,000 acres. And then near them as well, there's several other very large acreages of protected lands. And so if you put them all together, it creates this gigantic wildlife corridor to protect all these species. And so it's really important, I think, to think of our farm in the context of the entire watershed or our region.
Yeah, that's great. And so are there times when that interface of wildness has to be managed, or are you is it always good?
That's a good question. That's important for farmers to acknowledge. Sometimes those things they don't help us. We have rattlesnakes, and that I worry about our vineyard crew being bitten by a snake. That's incredibly rare, though. It's more of a psychological fear. We've been working in and around rattlesnakes for 25 years, and no one's ever been bitten or even anything close. But we come across them often throughout the year. We just they avoid us, we avoid them. But they're also part of the ecology. They're helping to, in addition to the owls, they're also helping to control some of the rodent pests that we don't want. Gophers can gnaw on the roots of vines, and if they're young vines, it can kill them. If they're older vines, it can stunt their growth. And then we have a lot of steep terraces, and when there's a lot of rodent burrowing in there, it can kind of compromise the structure of those terraces and risk a major blowout. So if we can keep those rodent populations in check, that helps protect the land. And so snakes have their role. We have coyotes and mountain lions, and because we're organic, it's harder for us to manage weeds. And so one of the techniques we've used in the past is to use grazing animals, mostly sheep, to keep our cover crops or keep our weeds down. And we always lose some to coyotes and occasionally to a mountain lion. So that's an interface with the wild landscape that is a concern, but it's a percentage of it's not, they don't kill every single sheep. It's sort of part of the cost of doing business. And they also have predators have a role in that they create this very tight, dense flocking of the grazing animals. They're a little bit scared, so they keep closer together, and that dense stocking of grazing animals is better for the land. It helps as long as they're moved frequently. It helps them eat all of the weedy species that they sometimes don't want to eat. It helps revive the land a little bit more to have them tightly stocked, and predators help encourage that behavior. There are probably some exotic pests that are not really part of the native landscape that are, that would be a concern. But I think because we haven't really suffered from those in our vineyard, and I think it's because of that wild space. They're just there's so many different potential predators of the insect pests that we don't have to. There hasn't been anything that's gotten out of control.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear you talk about how you're able to coexist with rattlesnakes and build into your model that if you may lose a few sheep, but overall you're getting some real benefit from those predators and managing the sheep too. So
Yeah.
Yeah, you have 20 barn owl boxes on your vineyard, and are they getting used every year? Can you tell us can you tell if they're helping with rodent control? And do you still trap gophers?
We occasionally, but we don't really have a trapping program. It's hard to quantify. I mean, we can quantify how many pounds of how much we're cleaning out of the owl boxes every year. So that's one method, but it's hard to know, how much damage they're avoiding or preventing. So yeah, when we first put them in, they were all occupied within a few months. It was incredible. But from time to time, there are always like a 2 or 3 that are not occupied. And so some of those we might want to recite. I'm not really sure that that's the practice for doing that. But we want to put in a lot more. Part of our kind of new approach or thinking about farming is because we're organic, we have fewer tools for managing weeds, and one of them is tillage that we have been using. But I've slowly I've always kind of known it, but now it's really kind of being driven home to me how that's destructive to soil, and we really need to preserve our soil. That's the most important thing. It's capable of holding just a massive amount of carbon, where we can take it out of the atmosphere and put it in the soil where it can be more beneficial. And so we need to treat our soil in a way that can really increase the organic matter dramatically. And one of the ways to do that is to keep a permanent grass cover or plant cover. The drawback to that, aside from competition, is that it's just great habitat for rodents. And so I want to sort of put in a lot more these owl boxes to kind of maximize the protection that they're offering against gophers and voles.
Oh, I love that. Another connection of why wild nature helps with reduce climate chaos.
Yeah.
So let's see. There aren't any questions in the chat yet. So I think if people want to submit a question or two, actually, here is a question. Do you use native plants for cover crops? Do you plant under vines, which you talked about? Do you use sulfur for grapes?
We do use sulfur for preventing powdery mildew. That's just endemic in this area. We try to use less of it, so we've been using stylet oil, which is sort of a refined mineral oil that we dilute to about 0.5%. We spray that on the vine leaves, and it just creates a really slippery surface, so the powdery mildew can't adhere to the vine. We use, most of our cover cropping is non-native. We use different clovers and kind of a mix of legumes and grassy grass plants. But that's because in the past we've been tilling that under, but I want to get away from that. So I think we'll probably put in a permanent, low-growing, perennial cover crop. But we also do every 50 feet or so sort of every 6th or 8th row, we'll plant an insectary blend. And that just creates a year-round, or not year-round, but a very long season of something flowering. And that helps attract the beneficial insects that control the vineyard pests. And those are all native. So that's a mix of like 15 or 20 different native flowering plants that we space strategically throughout each block.
Nice.
And then was there another part of that question? Do we plant under the rows or something?
Plant under the vines. Do you plant under the vines?
Yeah, so under the vines, that's the biggest challenge in organic grape growing, is how to manage the space underneath the vines. So we've used handheld weed whackers, which burn gasoline and just is very expensive labor-wise. we've used, we have an implement on the back of our tractor that can till right underneath the vine, and then when it gets to a vine, it pulls out of the vine row and into the tractor row to sort of avoid killing the vine. But that's very, very slow. It's tillage, so we trying to avoid that. And it takes our best tractor driver. For 2 months, all he's doing is sitting on that tractor with his body twisted around to watch make sure he's not damaging the vines, and that's just not ergonomically appropriate. So the thing that I think worked best was using sheep, because it's actually solving a problem with a solution rather than having more problems. But it just requires a little bit more management attention, because there's predator problems. They also damage some of the infrastructure. But it's just, to me, it seems like a more elegant solution. And this is so important to me. I really want to, now I'm sort of freeing up time that I used to spend on other things to really dedicate my attention on how we can make our vineyard operate in a more, just basically eliminating fossil fuels and helping to create permanent cover. So I think that's the way forward for our farm, and for farming in general. And so that's my focus.
Yeah, I think that is so important what you're saying. We need to figure out how to keep more cover on the ground. And so, there's a whole bunch of questions that have come in, and we have a really tight schedule. So what we're going to do is capture all those questions and work with Ames. I hope you don't mind, Ames. We can answer these questions offline and send them back to everyone the answers back to everyone who's participating. So I'm going to turn it over to now